Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second event here at the University of West London. We had a great time yesterday with Rory Kessler-Jones talking about all things technical, and that went very well. And today we're moving on to fiction. And last year, Lisa Evans, award-winning playwright, chaired our Ealing fiction panel online. She had a button where she shut everybody up, which she thought was great. And she hasn't got a button this time. But it was a fabulous discussion. It was just so interesting, and everybody was really on the same wavelength. It was great. So we knew we would have to have an Ealing fiction panel again this year, and so we've got new authors, and she's going to introduce Nicola, Rayner, Duval, and Vora. Welcome to you all. We've got the wonderful Waterson's books here from Chiswick, all the way from Chiswick, to sell the books, so please do buy them afterwards, and the authors will sign them. But without further ado, over to Lisa. A big warm welcome, please, for your Ealing fiction panel.
Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to be here and part of this festival, and thank you all for daring to come out. I mean, it's so nice to see people in 3D, apart from anything else, isn't it? It's lovely to have the three local authors here. Robin has introduced them. You can see their books, and buying them and enjoying them and reading them yourselves is part of the object of the exercise tonight. But I'm going to start by asking them to tell us a bit about your book, whatever you'd like us to know. What's your sales pitch that you'd like to give us for your book that will interest people here tonight? I'm going to start with you, Nicola, because you're right next to me.
So You and Me is about a woman called Fran, who is in her late 30s. She lives on her own, and she's still got a big soft spot for a boy she went to school with. It was inspired by a story that a friend of mine told me about. She was living on an estate, and they had a sort of post room on the estate, and one morning, very early in the morning, she went down to the post room and found a woman absolutely wearing full makeup, hair all done, asking for one of the men who lived on the estate. And she was quite taken aback and confused, and she asked someone else on the estate about this woman. And apparently she went to school with this man who was happily married and had children and a family. Mm-hmm. And she had a crush on him, and she never let go of that, and she would still turn up where he lived, where he worked, or sort of ready for him. And she was harmless, but the story really captured my imagination, because I just thought about why someone would hold on to someone for such a long time, for decades and decades, and that she became my Fran, who is still holding on to this romantic idea of Charles, a boy she was at school with, and she was a little lonely, and he was kind to her, but after all these years she's still holding on. And at the beginning of the novel, she is on a crowded tube platform, and Charles is there too, coincidentally, and his best friend, Dickie, falls in front of a train and is killed. And Fran thinks that this strange, slightly sinister incident might be the thing that gets her close to Charles. So that's the opening of the novel, and it's a story really about obsession and loneliness, and hopefully with a bit of an unreliable narrator.
They're always the best kind.
Absolutely.
Lovely, thank you. There's plenty to come back to on that, but we'll go across the panel. Robin, you're next in line. What can you tell us about your book?
Okay, well, this latest book, Going to America, is about three people going to America, and two stories which interweave through the course of the book. One of the stories is about a young man back in 1963 who finds himself a little unexpectedly in New York, falls in with a rather glamorous couple, and very foolishly and impetuously accepts a lift from them to New Orleans. And as the story develops, his relationship with the couple becomes increasingly more complicated. The denouement of that strand of the book effectively is an affair that he has with the woman who is older than him, which leads in turn to the husband very jealously, but fortunately for him, confusing the lovers and killing another guy altogether. There is a fallout from that, which I won't take you through now, but obviously takes us through to the end of that strand of the book. Now, the other strand, the other quite different story, you might say, which is interwoven chapter by chapter through the whole book with the first story that I've just described, is about a 75-year-old, once famous actor, retired now, not necessarily of his own free will, but anyway, he's not getting parts offered as he used to be, is effectively blackmailed or bullied by his 11-year-old granddaughter into taking her to America, something he foolishly promised when he was in his cups when she was about 3, and being that kind of 3-year-old, she remembered his promise for the rest of her life so far, and he's not been able to escape it. So he takes her to America, and coincidentally, you might say, they wind up in New Orleans, the same place to which in 1963 the young man with the glamorous, incredibly rich couple went to. And their story too is, in a sense, a chapter of accidents. She's too much for him, is the fact of the matter. Age is beginning to exert some toll on the old actor. He gets things wrong. She is quite sharp enough to observe this. Things begin to fall apart, but one thing which is certainly not his fault is when one of those terrible southern storms that erupt from time to time in the southern states of America grounds all air flights across the bottom half of the United States. Something he couldn't anticipate, but he's not been able to anticipate either any way of dealing with a problem like that. All the hotels are booked. There's no transport because all the businessmen have grabbed it and gone off with alternate means of getting home or back to their jobs. And so the rest of that story, which I'm not going to relate now, is effectively how he manages finally to save the day, and its hero, Grandad, I suppose, at the end. Those are the narratives. You'll guess, of course, that the two narratives are not quite as separate as they appear. They gradually interweave. Well, that's the novel I'll write next.
Okay, lovely.
But not this one.
Okay.
Not this one. And they come together, I hope, in an extremely satisfying way at the very end. So that's
good.
That's the story,
wonderful.
or the
Thank you.
two stories. Mm-hmm. But following on from what Nicola said, obviously it's not just about that.
It wouldn't be just about that, would it?
Should we reserve what it's
I think you
also
should. Yes,
about
they
till
need to have
later?
something to read when they take it home
Yeah.
on the bus later tonight. Yes. And Saz, what can you tell us about your new book?
So my story was inspired by someone I met when I was at university. I met somebody who could speak Gujarati, which is the language that I know, but couldn't speak English. And I was like, what? And all she could speak was French. And then I found out that her family was the family that had been relocated to France because they were Ugandan refugees, but they didn't have an identity. They didn't have a passport. They were all Ugandans. And if you know anything about East African history, lots and lots of people migrated to East Africa in the 1920s from India to help build the railways and everything else, the civil service. My grandfather was one of them. And so that was the nugget of the idea that came right at the beginning. And then I have a love-hate relationship with Jane Eyre. And I was watching the film, we're talking about the 1940s film with Joan Fontaine, you know, really kind of, and then I thought, you know what, I could write a version of Jane Eyre, but with Gujarati characters, where Jane Eyre is now Hema Putney. She is an orphan. She's been brought up by her uncle and aunt because of a devastating incident that happened, and she is trying to escape from her home. And what she does is that she's a language student. She loves modern languages, so she knows all the European languages. So she applies for a summer job in her final year at university to south of France, because there's an advert in The Lady, if anybody knows about The Lady. I've been an avid reader of The Lady. And in there it sort of asks for Gujarati would be ideal as an addition. So she applies for the job, she gets the job eventually. Then she moves to south of France, and when she's in south of France, she meets up with Amélie, who is her charge, who she's going to be looking after and teaching her how to speak English, because the family are going to bring her to England, because they're the ones that are now have her as a guardian. So we are led to believe that her mother is no longer alive, and she then meets up with Raoul Reicher, who is her guardian, and they have a bit of a frisson. There's something definitely going on, an attraction, but he's a lot older than her. She's employed by him. All of those kind of things stop them from having a relationship. And when they do eventually get together, she no longer works for them, but she's still become a really good family friend and gets invited to all of their religious festivals that they do. And there are things like Navratri, which is a Gujarati folk festival that we have for 9 days. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favourite festivals, so it appears in my other book as well. It actually did appear. And you find out whether there is a Mrs. Reicherer in the attic or not,
right,
as the case may be.
We'll wait to find out if there's a giant blaze at any point in this. Thank you all. They all sound like something I would certainly like to read. So what I want to ask you, I want to take you all back to when you started out, like your first book, you know, before you all became such experts as you are now. How did you approach your first book? What was it like trying to get published? How easy was it for you? I'm assuming that there may well be some writers who are writing stuff at the moment and wondering what that's like to be at that place. Can you? I mean, I will flit about, but if you've got something to say, just chip in. Don't wait for me to go from one to the other. But Saz, you look like you've got something to say.
I'll say
here.
something, because my story is probably different from Robin's and Nicola's, because they actually did manage to get an agent. When I first started, this is my third book, and I wrote this during lockdown because it was just a way to escape to south of France, to be quite honest, nothing else.
Nice footwork.
In my head.
I'm liking this.
I wrote my book in 2006, tried to send it, my initial books, which is a retelling of our personal experience when we had our son, and he eventually passed away. He was disabled, and he passed away as a baby. And I was told by many agents that actually were kind enough to reply back to me to say that it wasn't the right fit, it was too niche, and they couldn't think of where to put me. So that was in 2006. I put it away, and then I came back to the book, the two books that before that, in 2018, and then decided that I'm just going to write this. Sent it to a couple of writer friends, and they sort of said, you know what, you can self-publish. So that's what I did. I actually self-published. Mm-hmm. I wrote it, sent it to an editor who actually edited it properly, paid for that editor, right, sent it to a proofreader, paid for that proofreader, and then first of all, I decided to do it as an e-book. And there are places, people that do that, where you actually don't have to pay. You can actually, as long as you've got it formatted properly, everything is all sorted, they will actually take it and then distribute it. With that model, you actually get 60% as an author. Sometimes you get 50%, and the rest, they get the rest of the money. And then I thought, you know what, I'll see if I can do a paperback version, and which is what I did. So this second book is exactly the same, a digital and paperback, and that's what I've
So
been doing.
you didn't get that wonderful thing that it's kind of like, how
No, you didn't
lovely,
get that
somebody's
thing.
going to publish me,
Yeah,
and then you hand
no.
it over and they say, now rewrite it.
Yeah, no.
No, exactly.
I just wrote what I got. So if I give it to an agent, they'll read it and they go, no, forget it, this is rubbish. Rewrite it, probably.
Skip out to the bit where somebody doesn't like it. Yes,
Yes.
I like that. That's got a good ring to it. Did you, Nicola, what was your experience? Did you get an offer and then go, we're going to rewrite it for you now? What?
How did it happen? So I was one of those people who always wanted to be a writer. That was just always, it was a writer or vet, and I preferred English A level to sciences A level, I'm afraid.
And you get there quicker, do you?
Yeah,
Well, don't you?
so
Great deal
it was
quicker.
going to be a writer, and then I worked out quite quickly. We were talking earlier that how writing isn't necessarily the best way to make money. So I figured I would need a day job. So I trained as a journalist. That's my day job. And then during my lunch hours and on the train, I started writing my first novel. I had a really supportive writing group here in Ealing, and we'd meet every week and they'd read my chapters and feedback. That took a very long time to get the first draft finished. Really excited to have finished it. Took it to an agent, and she said, "Yeah, you have to rewrite all of this."
At least she was interested.
No,
I'd
she
say
yeah. I think she was interested. It was written from my first book, The Girl Before You, was written from 5 points of view initially, and she said that's way too much. You need to
It's tricky to handle five.
you need to
isn't it?
narrow it down to 3 at the most.
Yeah.
So that took a lot of rewriting. So I was like, okay. And started
Lot of
again.
crying, yes, of course. That goes with your territory, doesn't it?
Started from the beginning again, rewrote it, and that was a lot of work. And then, actually, funny enough, took it back to an agent at the same agency, and showed it to him. He said, it's not nasty enough, it's not dark enough, it's not quite right for us. Went to a bookshop. He recommended some really nasty, dark thrillers that I should read to, make my stuff a bit more like that. Bought them, kind of came home, sadly, opened my laptop, and an email had arrived in my inbox from a competition I'd sent off quite quickly, saying that I was the runner-up and my prize was representation by an agent. So
Yay.
it was a funny day starting off on it was on the same day, having my coffee with the first agent and then coming back to that email, and that really was the stuff of dreams, to be honest, and everything moved quite quickly after that. I got representation at LBA, who are a fantastic agency. And they did want a little bit of rewriting and tweaking, because basically there is always more rewriting to be done.
Plays that are not written, they're rewritten is going on my gravestone, yeah.
That is never over, exactly. But once it was tweaked, we found a publisher quite quickly, which was Avon, an imprint of HarperCollins, who specialise in thrillers and mysteries and women's fiction. So
I think actually one of the things that I find so many of the writers that belong to the writers group that I run in Ealing is that is like the first question they're asked is, what genre are you? And if you don't fit into, I was thinking about you, Robin, here, because you've got when you were talking about your book, and you were saying it's part comedy, part romance, part great adventure. Did they not give you a seriously hard time about that?
Yes. The official genre for it's literary.
Oh, literary fiction.
Yes,
I have
literary
one of my group actually says I write miserable literary fiction, which he says is the only kind to write. So, but you've sidestepped
It
that
did
one.
seem to me that literary fiction covered most sins and opportunities.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry about that. I mean, my story is not so different from Saz's as perhaps you assume, and it's also quite similar to what seemed to be the consensus of last year's panel. I mean, one thing that came out of last year's panel, which I found fascinating, was that all 3 writers had plugged away trying to get agents over and over and over again, and in the end, always slightly serendipitously, perhaps a tiny bit like your competition in poetry, they wound up with a publisher before they wound up with an agent, and out of the publisher emerged an agent.
Yeah.
Now, what happened with me, I don't in fact have an agent, Saz. It's Nicola. This is the only one of the three of us that currently has an agent. What happened with me was on this book was that I sent it off in the usual way, the 50 pages synopsis deal, to not a great many, because years are passing and I'm less interested in that side of the business. It's less necessary perhaps for me, to be honest. And it got nicer letters than I ever used to before. The kind of letter that occasionally said, I really enjoyed your book, but it really doesn't fit in with my portfolio.
Publishing is good. It's a very nice rejection,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
Yes.
I mean,
That's good.
almost
pleasant
worth
about it.
framing or cutting out and putting on the back of the book, with the,
It's not for me. That's another one, isn't
not
it?
for me, but I wish you the very best of success.
Yes.
With
Off sideways, yeah.
That's right. Okay. In the end, I did go direct to a publisher, a fairly new type of publisher, the kind of publisher which will do a deal with you. So this isn't 100 miles from what you would handling at one point. The Book Guild is an organisation that, depending upon how much faith it has in your book, will put a little money or a lot of money. In the end, the split was 70-30. So I put 30% of the costs of publishing. The Book Guild put in the 70, and you'll not be surprised that the profits at the end of the day are divided up pretty well on the same basis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hadn't heard of that way of doing stuff. Yeah.
I think it's beginning to roll that.
Yeah.
So is that?
Yeah.
I thought there was one time it's like Vanity Press, but that's not Vanity Press, where they just publish your books and then you have a whole ton of 5,000 books just sitting in rooms trying to get
I'm
them
sure
away.
that still happens, but it's much more sophisticated now, isn't it? There's
Okay.
and there's many, like you
Yes.
say, you employ editors and people like that,
Yeah.
so that basically what goes out may not necessarily be a
Yes.
publisher's first choice, but it is something that is polished and it is got a certain
you still
standard.
can do that. There's
a big snobbery about it still,
a
I
company
think.
called Lulu.com, isn't there?
Yes,
That you've probably
yes,
heard of.
yes.
Which is, I think, Vanity Press.
I
per
had
se,
one, I
but
remember
it
one of
does
my
very well.
One of my students said that was I think it was her when they wanted to write her grandma's tale, and it was for the family,
Yeah.
and they said go to Lulu.
Yeah.
So if you want to publish something into a book like that, which is just for small circulation of people, so that it's in a book, that's what that's for. But it's not for those with literary ambition in terms of. Because I think there's a status as to who publishes you and who your agent is and all of that, which
Oh, certainly.
carries you on. So did you get with your one? Did you have to get was it a 2-book deal, or the minute you wrote one did they say where's the next one?
No, they were actually two separate deals, but it was, I mean, it might as well have been a 2-book deal because I wrote You and Me quite quickly, having taken years over the first one. I had a year to write the second, so.
And I'm impressed at that, because again I know writers who kind of they've got the first one and that was out, and then it was where's the second one? I go, I just recovered from that.
I know.
Come on.
I think it's strange because for so long you're focused on this one book that you want to get published, and then as soon as you get it published, someone's not even before you've got it published, people start saying, well, where's the next one and what's it about? And you think, oh, well, I have to do that again.
Yes. And
So,
match it. I mean,
yes,
if you've been if it's been successful, it's quite hard, isn't it, to do that? I'm trying to think who it was. I think it might have been Donna Tartt saying she wasn't going to write her second novel. She was going to wait, and she did some form of fact book, because she said basically they're going to kill me.
And
I was so successful they will
she
kill
has
me. And then
10 years, doesn't
10
she?
years
I
before
mean,
she wrote
wow.
the what's it called? It's a bird name,
No,
isn't it?
the little friend.
Goldfinch.
Goldfinch.
Goldfinch,
Thank you.
yeah.
Reader on the front row.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's my kind of problem. But maybe she could afford to wait for 10 years.
I think she can.
Well, it did so well, didn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, all
But
the
I'm sure
books-
I'm sure that the critics would have been going for. If you've got that degree of success, you've got to to match that. Is quite something. So about rewriting. So Robin, did anybody say to you you've got to do rewrites on this?
Well, not what came across to me as the kind of horror story of last year with people insisting on root and branch rewrites. No, I again very much like you. I had imposed upon me by the no, that is the wrong expression. The publisher gave me an editor who provided me with lots of notes and suggested improvements, but it was it was nothing like so alarming as you were hinting at a moment ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, not all the editor's suggestions were taken up, because I.
Dug your heels in.
Obstinate
No, it's my
elderly
book.
person,
But there are other ways of doing it. I have like a lot of beta readers that I just used to. I sent my first. Well, it's usually about the 6th or 7th draft. By then, I feel confident that I need to send it to somebody because it makes sense. And I get feedback saying, "Well, what's the point of having that? Doesn't make any sense. Can you do this? Move it around." So I always take that as an opinion, because you can't. I don't think you can write in a silo, and I think it's really good if you get somebody else to kind of tell you that, because you're like in the story most of the time, aren't you? So it is really nice to have somebody who sits back and tells you differently. When my first 2 books, I had somebody an editor that sort of just didn't make not too many comments. And but this one, I sent it to somebody, and she was like, "No, don't like that. Why don't you change this? Rewrite this?" And we to and froed for quite a long time, so it costs more money. But at least then I'm really happy with this one. And the other 2 I read and I'm thinking, well, I can get rid of that. I can get rid now, because I think writing is a craft that you learn as you go along, and it's a skill.
The more you
You're
do
not
it, the
going
better
to-
you get at it.
Yeah, and you're not going to be the well. I think there are people who are like that, but I'm not a genius when it comes to writing. So I think that's what I miss. It's the people sort of saying to you, and I would love to have had an editor go, no, get rid of this, get rid of this, just to kind of bring it all together.
Yeah, I think there's a myth abroad that one sits down and writes stuff and it sort of comes out of the ether, and it's the amount of craft that's involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not generally kind of part of the.
And the amount of
PR.
rewriting.
Yes.
Sorry to bring it back to that, but I do think, the amount of I think, is it Claire McIntosh who said recently that sort of about 30% of her first draft makes it into the next one. There is so much rewriting. Well, there can be so much rewriting, I think, depending on what sort of writer you are, whether you're a planner and someone who plans really diligently, or whether you're someone who, like me, has to write a draft first to get to know the characters before the story starts taking shape.
But that's quite clear. I mean, in fact, I have another hat that I wear. That I work for the Royal Literary Fund, and I actually work at this lovely university with students with their writing skills. And one of the things we say all the time to them is that apparently the percentage of when you're writing anything, an essay, a novel, or whatever, is 30% planning, 20% writing, 50% editing. And I think it
really
is
interesting.
sort of that
Yes,
amount,
it is
isn't
that.
it?
Yes, I
And
would
then there
agree.
are scenes. I've written things in all the books that I scenes come up, and I think, well, I'll put these 2. And then I think when I'm actually putting it into the draft, I think, well, that's useless, but I'll put it away. It might come useful somewhere else.
Oh, never throw it away.
Yeah.
Go in a drawer. It'll come back around
So it
another
comes
time.
useful for another.
recycle.
You can put some other and change it a little bit. So there are ways that happens, because I think it is that, because if a scene does come into your head that you think, oh, this will work with these, and then when you write it down, and then the next bit follows, and you think, but that's no good in here at all. They're behaving totally different to what they're supposed to. I find the middle bit confusing. How everybody else, I get
There's
really...
a place. Everybody said there's a sort of classic bit in a novel, isn't
Yeah.
there, where you go when it's
30,000 words.
Yes.
That's it. When come on, tell us what happens.
Well, this time, because I'm writing my 3rd novel, I've opened a Word document on my desktop and just written notes to myself for the next one to remind myself that every time I hit 30,000 words, it's a complete nightmare, and you do start thinking, because you start off so cheerfully, thinking, oh, a new project, this one's going to go perfectly, and then you hit 30,000, which is sort of, I think actually in last year's panel they put it really well, because you're sort of getting to the halfway point.
Yeah.
You get to the point where you kind of either go on or you turn back, and that's when it's really tempting. It's when you're hit with all the difficult, tricky plot bits, and it's when other ideas start sounding more appealing. It's when it gets hard, basically. But I find once you push past 30,000, it starts picking up.
So
again.
do you have the, just write it down, just get to the end? Is that, and then you can go back and redo it, but do not go back and start scene
Generally,
one
I
again.
think that's a good rule. It doesn't. For me, that doesn't always work. I had one novel that I abandoned before the one that I'm just finishing now. So I think it depends, but I do think getting a first draft down as quickly as possible is a good idea. Would you agree?
I think it is that point, isn't it? It's the point where you have something's going to happen, whether the characters decide they're going to go somewhere or they're going to die. And quite often you're like, I'm going to just kill this person, this is ridiculous. And then what I try to do is then I try and, because I'm a plotter, I actually do plot.
I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous. Yeah.
And then I kind of go, right, okay, this is the bit where I want to kill them off and I just want to throw it away. What I will do is go to the end, and I have a kind of vague idea what the ending's going to be, and I write the ending, and only write the ending in any way I can, thinking it's going to be. Then it actually triggers for me to go back to the middle, to the bit where I want to kill them off, because I've suddenly. But that ending is never going to be the right ending.
Do you bring them alive again, or do they stay killed off?
Well, some characters just were in my books and never seen the light of day, because all the drafts that I've written, they're just not there. They're not.
This is the moment when I used to work on EastEnders as well, and this is the moment when the actors would wander into the office and go, "Just want to talk about my character development." And you go,
Yes.
So you've heard on the grapevine, you're going down to the canal,
You're gone,
which is always a bad place to be if you want to survive.
I had a character in my first novel, Dan, I think, who was I honestly can't remember how many times he was killed off, brought back to life, killed off, in different drafts, brought back to life. I honestly can barely remember at the end. I think he
A survivor?
Up, yeah,
Was he a
was.
survivor?
He had a lot of different endings. He wasn't very nice actually, but. Anyway.
Well, actually, that's probably a good one to keep. It's the really nicey ones you have to kill off, honey, because they're not.
Because they're the ones
so
that don't
potent,
make
are they?
anything.
No.
They
Yeah.
don't add to the plot. They don't add to anything. And it's like, oh, what was the point of having? Get rid of that.
There's that lovely. I think it was Hitchcock, wasn't it? It was about drama. His life with the dull bits taken out.
Yeah.
And that urge to put everything in is
Yeah.
something with new writers that is kind
It
of
is
like,
very difficult.
but
Yeah.
please, can we skip to where something exciting happens? I'm so jealous of you with the plot thing.
No,
The
me
fact that you
too.
can do plotting.
I do
too.
plotting big time. A lot of post-its plotting. So
Do you
that
have
post-it,
spreadsheets?
and I have spreadsheets.
So jealous. I'm so jealous.
I know there's envy clouds coming all over this side of the room.
And I have bubble clouds and a big kind of mind map, and and then I have spreadsheets, and they actually make the final novel work for me because of the spreadsheets. I'm terrible. That's
No,
not really.
it's a wonderful thing. Are you a plotter or?
Well, I think I'm a bit like Saz, yes. I've always thought my approach was incorrect, because what I've done in all 4 books that I've written, for better or worse, they've all been based first on what I've always called my maquette, which is the whole novel worked out, probably lasting 60, 80, even 100 pages.
Well, if you're
long.
writing thrillers, you have to, don't you? You have
Yeah.
to know where you're going,
Well,
or not?
not everybody does.
Do they not?
apparently.
I thought all thriller writers started at the end and worked backwards.
Thriller writers, yes, but I suppose that must be true. Otherwise,
No, I mean, shoot me down. I've never written a thriller. You're the expert. What about you?
Well, you heard how many times I had to rewrite my first novel. My one rule now is that I have to, which sounds really obvious to plotters, but I have to know who did it before I start. So if I know, with You and Me, it was also rewritten a bit, but I knew where I was headed. I knew who done it and how it all unfolded. Whereas with The Girl Before You, I worked that out as I was writing, which was quite painful.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, it would be lovely. I really wish I had a plan, but
So you had sorry, I interrupted you. You had your
yeah. I had right.
scenario.
I like the word maquette, yes, because
Maquette,
that's
beg
what it
pardon.
is. It's,
Okay, let's stick
it's
with
the sort of
maquette.
miniature version of what you need to explode into
Yeah.
a inverted commas real
Yeah.
book. But the thing about the maquette is that when you then start writing the proper version of it, you keep changing it. So you constantly, so somebody that you wanted to kill off around about 30,000 words in, turns out to be much more interesting than you thought they were.
So it's the interesting factor, isn't it? That's what
Yes.
keeps them alive, isn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So there's always, obviously, a basic resemblance between the original short form and the final version. But the other thing, of course, is people talking already about redrafting and redrafting. I'm afraid, perhaps because I have the time, I redraft constantly. I mean, and that book is about the 10th thoroughgoing rewrite through from beginning
Only
to
10?
end. Is that
Don't be a
nothing?
playwright. No, really, don't be a playwright. And you know,
How many?
Oh, jeez.
Hundreds.
Lots
Hundreds,
and
yeah.
lots. And if you're working on series, obviously,
Yeah.
because you're having to adapt for other people's continuity stuff and things. So no, I mean 19 is par for the course.
I think Michaela Cole said she wrote "I May Destroy You." I mean, it was more than 100. It was
yeah.
over, and I think it was 150 or something.
Yeah.
But that is, I'm guessing, because people require it, or you don't do of your own volition so many rewrites.
Possibly, but I think because you go into rehearsal with stuff. I mean, if you're talking about a play rather than a television, if you go into rehearsal, and then it will change in rehearsal, because what you've got at the beginning is a kind of instruction kit for actors and directors and designers. So when you all put it there and you see what happens, then and things will change and things will not work because the actors just show you that they don't work, and they do show you if it doesn't work as well. They say it terribly badly if they hate it. So you have to change that. So it is, yes, it's an evolving process because it's an ensemble thing. It's so incredibly different from writing a novel, which I'm finding at the moment I'm struggling with which I one thing I want down less about me. You said something about people who you ask to read.
So
That's
beta
what
readers.
interests me.
I get a bunch of people.
When you say beta readers, what's
As in-
a beta?
Beta as in alpha beta.
So a second reader. You
A
mean, sort
second
of.
reader.
Right,
So
okay.
I've kind of read it and I like it and I sort of think, yeah, this is quite nice. I can do with it, and then I send it off to people that I know, mostly friends and family, and the occasional stranger who's kind of referred by someone else. And then they come back. I ask them specific questions, or what did you like about,
How
about the
wonderful was
characters?
it?
No, about the characters. What do you think works? What doesn't work? Does the dialogue work? They're all kind of really. Some of them are really kind of very strict questions, and some of them are very broad. And they come back. Some of them are very critical. And
How much do you feel you, obviously not very much, I would suggest, that protect yourself from being kind of kneecapped by somebody going, well, actually, I hated the main character, for instance?
I mean, I've had people saying, "You're not going to do this to this person, are you?" And I'm kind of thinking, well, actually, yes, I am. I haven't had anybody say, maybe they're just very nice people, saying they didn't like anyone in particular. But it's quite nice to have somebody who's not been with you on that journey. And I think, for me, it helps me because it helps me grow, because I feel I really do write in a silo. If you spoke to my husband, I'm like locked away in my office most of the time, and he's like, "Here's your cup of tea. Do you want lunch?"
What a good husband.
I know, I have an excellent husband.
Really?
But it's over there. But it is really strange, because once I start, I'm in there, in the zone. I can't think of anything else but to write this stuff down. And sometimes, to be quite honest, it's just vomit. Everything that pulls out of me. So therefore, the beta readers are really good, where they do come back and say things like, "Is this guy?" And then you kind of think, "Ooh, yes, he is."
How many people would you ask? Because I would worry about having
Not too many.
Yeah.
You
No.
don't want
Committees.
I
No,
usually
yeah.
have about 5 or 6
That's a good-
maximum,
yeah, that's a good
and I give them 3 to 4 months to get back to me with some ideas. And some of them are just come back and saying, "Oh God, I couldn't put it down. I really loved it." And I'm thinking, yeah, but you didn't really give me what I wanted. But there are some which says, "I don't expect this person to behave this way. I don't expect this scene to be here. It doesn't make sense." So that kind of then makes me start
Do
thinking.
you think that you would have had that attitude to other people's responses, because you don't know until you get them that they're going to be helpful or positive, presumably, if you'd started writing, if you were kind of like Nicola's age when you started writing? Because you and Robin both, Robin, I think you started as a writer, then did a proper job, excuse me saying that.
Yes, but I was...
My parents have been waiting for me to have one of those for quite some time. And they've given up and died now. I think because you started with another career, didn't you?
Yes.
And then went to writing after that. Do you think, back to what I was saying, do you think that you would have been that confident if
I-
you'd done it when you were younger?
So my career was a graphic designer, motion graphic designer, and when you present any title sequence to a whole bunch of people, there's usually about 12, 15 of them, and they critique your work to death.
So
So
you're
I'm
used to it.
used to the critiquing. And that's the thing, I think a lot of people are not used to that. But you still feel offended, to be quite honest, because I still feel like, oh God, you've just told something that I've been working on for ages and it's rubbish.
Well, it's very personal. It's
And
something
it
you
is really
created,
personal.
isn't
But I
it?
think my journey in writing has been very different because it was a way to get out of anxiety and panic. And our first story is about the grief and loss of our child. It is a way for me to escape from what's going on and how I feel mentally. So now, when people do say some negative things, I kind of use techniques that I've learnt through my cognitive behaviour therapy to say, well, that's their opinion. I'll stick
I'm writing
to mine.
this down for students.
Yeah.
And me.
So I think that's what it is. It's almost like that's their opinion. I understand it. And that's the thing, I think, for anybody who's starting off, is I think you can take critique, but you should be able to sell your own idea, if you have it, to somebody reasonably, or have confidence to actually think, well, actually, it will work. Maybe
But
it
it's a
won't work.
balance. It's a real balance,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because you
Yeah.
don't know what you've got. I mean,
No.
you start off thinking this is a really good idea. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be wasting your time. But you don't really know that, do you?
No.
And it's continuing with it.
And it's
Yeah.
always somebody else's opinion, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
and there, you could have two people that you think are the same, that read the genre,
Yeah.
and one will say, I love this, really read it through in one sitting, and somebody else will say, God, I read chapter 1 and then put it away. So I think everybody has different opinions and different feelings, don't they?
Nicola, do you have anybody that you hand? I mean, is it your agent, or it goes first, or your husband, or to?
I'm trying to think about the order. My agent probably sees the first draft. My husband, he usually reads my first draft as well. He's sitting over there.
And he's got a strong
So I
survival
can't-
instinct.
I have to tell the truth. I have to tell the truth. Yeah, he often reads my first draft. My writing group are amazing. They see early drafts as well. And as I said earlier, we've worked together for a really long time, so I really trust them.
Do you work in progress with them? Will you show them kind of like the first couple of chapters, or do you not hand it
Bit
to
of
anybody
both.
till it's done?
A bit of both. I think with my first one, it was because it was so slow. They saw a lot of it develop. My second one, I had to write it more quickly, so I think they might have seen a little bit, and then they got to see an early draft. And I'm trying to think. I mean, I say an early draft, maybe not the very first one, because I don't think anyone except my agent maybe should see that one. But an early draft, maybe a second draft. And then I've got a couple of other writing friends who see it as well.
Yeah.
And then you need to pick the right people. You need to pick people who will tell you the truth kindly.
So that you aren't going around with no
because
kneecaps.
you don't want complete brutality, but you want helpful criticism, and you want to make it better. So I like you, maybe 4 or 5 people I really trust, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the brutal kneecap person. In 2006, I did join a writing group and showed them my first 4 or 5 chapters, so it was about 50 pages of my book, and one person who was on there just completely slated it and said it was a load of old rubbish and that it was too flowery descriptive and there was too many emotions in it and nobody would want to read it. And then I put it away, 2006 to 2017, because I felt that nobody was going to ever want to.
That's not
want to read
helpful
it.
criticism.
No.
That's not helping you make a piece
No,
of work
so
better, which
that's
is
But
what
isn't it
you want.
interesting how we remember the bad things?
And never the good things.
And
yes.
the good ones.
Oh,
we
yes.
don't write them down. Write down the
Oh
good ones.
no, it's so true. You can
Yes.
sort of recite your 1-star reviews off by heart, but like any
Oh,
of your
yeah.
5-star ones, you can't remember.
Yeah, I have friends of mine. We swap them. My favourite one is I wouldn't cross Derwentwater to see this play. And hers was, this is a load of piffle. That's Bryony Lavery, who's done quite well, actually.
There's a writer, what's her name, Louise, who does the 1-star review poems, and I can't remember her name, but she makes poems up with her 1-star.
Oh,
review.
really?
They're
Oh,
hilarious.
good for her.
And she said it's really good therapy. Yes, no, they're fantastic.
So, how do you all deal with rejection?
Badly.
Badly, I think. I mean, there are days when I kind of go, oh, it's pointless me writing this. I'm not going to bother doing this. And then I have some really good cheerleaders that go, but you're writing for yourself, are you not? And I'll go, yeah, that's it. Okay, I'll carry on.
So you
But
have the
you know-
right people to ring up, is what you do. That's
you
yours.
just have the right people to
Okay.
ring up. Or what do you do? Drink a lot?
Yeah,
A little.
Yeah. That's just me. Robin, what about you?
I don't think I deal with it well at all, because what happens if for example, on this theme, if I've asked somebody to read the book, and they make very nice, gentle, considerate comments to me, but actually they're going right to the centre of what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
And though they only mean to help, I've been in a situation where I've just put the work away for literally weeks because I'm so shattered by this person I trust, very thoughtfully saying things which make me think it's rubbish.
So it wasn't that they had hit a nerve, that there was something in there that you knew wasn't quite right, and they'd told you unkindly about that, or is it just the fact that they didn't tell you in a way that was helpful?
I think they told it me as helpfully as they could. I mean, no criticism here, but I think it is always, certainly 90% plus of the time, stuff that I've, at the back of my mind, I've thought this isn't quite right, but I haven't been able to see a better way of doing it. And then, of course, it's carried on, it's developed, so that if you go back to the initial flaw and criticise that, you're criticising far more in the book than a simple thing, and it just makes me miserable.
It's painful.
Yes.
It's painful. There is no pain quite like writing pain, really.
No, well, because you are kind of going there,
Yes.
aren't you? It's a great big
It's my
gift,
heart,
and
yes.
yes, and it's kind of like, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just trod on something.
Exactly.
So, we're coming towards the end of our time, and I've been instructed to give time for questions. Has anybody got any questions? Yes.
I've got a question for Nicola. You said you'd always wanted to write. So before your first book, The Girl Before You, had you written other books that you've shelved?
I started. I think definitely one, maybe a couple, but it was The Girl Before You was the first one I finished. And I had an idea in my 20s. I moved back to Wales and sort of said, I'm going to, before I trained as a journalist and got real, I'm going to be a novelist, and worked in a pub for a while and probably spent too much time in the pub and not enough time behind the keyboard. But I did start a couple at that point. But I think I had that whole thing of hitting about the 30,000 mark again and struggling with plot and structure and gave up. And it was really grateful that with The Girl Before You, it was just a strong enough, we were talking about ideas and hooks, and it was just a strong enough hook and idea to keep me interested for a long time, for me to finish it, because that took a very long time.
I've actually found that there's if I find that something is really not going well, there's other writers that I read that actually kind of like give me confidence again.
Yes.
You
Yes.
just kind of go, no, it's possible. There's somebody who's doing something very new or different
No,
or
you're
whatever.
absolutely right. I found that recently with Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, a book.
It's on my list. Is it
Oh,
wonderful?
I just adored it. I loved it so much, and it really made me rethink about writing, because she writes in such a natural, beautiful style, but it's not very novelistic. It's just very simply told. It's like being told a story very simply by a friend, and the simplicity is yes, as you say.
Isn't it?
I've sort of thought, I'd love to take some of that into my next novel. But you're right.
Ali Smith does it for me.
Yeah.
She has that
Someone
same
who gives
sort
you
of
a sort
thing.
of
Yes.
mojo back. Yeah.
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 Do you have writers that you go to who kind of like get you going again?
Yes. I'm particular book that I used to go to, Gerald Barry's book. Help me with the title.
Gerald Barry.
You don't like Gerald?
No,
Barry?
I can't think of the title.
American author, Irish-American author, wrote a wonderful book about. I'm so sorry, I can't
Don't worry.
remember.
Think of
titles.
something else and it'll come back to you. That's
Yes.
what
Everyone's
I do.
fishing their
This is
phones
what I do.
out. Yeah.
Yes, but the answer to your question is yes. it is extraordinarily helpful to go back and just re-immerse yourself in people having successfully got it down on paper.
Yeah, I think,
And- and
it's
it-
nice
it-
being part
it
of that
comes
tribe,
through.
isn't it?
And I think
Yeah.
remembering why you love stories, remembering why you love writing, remember why you wanted
Yeah.
to do all of this, the first excitement that we all had, sort of reading books under the covers when we were
Yeah.
little. I think because it can be quite tough psychologically, rewriting things and rejection, all the things that go with writing. It's the more you can remind yourself of the magic of it. I know that sounds a bit woo-woo. The
I think
better,
it's a good
because
word.
yeah, you know that it
And the
keeps-
escapement, you
yeah.
escape, you take people to somewhere altogether else, don't you?
Yeah.
Another world.
Yeah.
You wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I think it was hearing you all talk about writing and rewriting and plotting and pantsing, what we call pantsing, which is seat of your pants writing. And, you know, I know all writers have the awareness of that rising tension, which I think at 30,000 words, it's how you keep moving
Yeah.
up, which has become suddenly quite difficult, much as it does on a real hill. But my question was more about genre and knowing what kind of book it is that you're writing, because your book seems to be a comedy and various things. I don't know what kind of book yours is. It sounds like I don't know. It sounds like some sort of journey anyway, like most books are. But my question is, beyond the arc, beyond the actual basic story arc, are the tropes of the particular book that you're trying to write, whether it's a psychological thriller or whatever, are they helpful in terms of being a corset that will keep you from sort of falling all over the place, or are they sort of suffocating?
I think things have changed with genre. There was a time when genre was like you'd be just literary fiction, or it would be crime, and suddenly we've got lots of hybrid genres. So mine is supposed to be romantic suspense, so it's romance and suspense because it's Jane Eyre.
Did you have those things that it must have in your mind?
No, because I just wrote and then I thought, oh God, this fits into this genre. I better add a bit more suspense in here. So for my first 1, 2, 3, probably 3, no, possibly about 6th draft, I sort of thought, oh, this is becoming a little bit more romance suspense, so I ought to put all of these things in
So yes,
to kind of make it, yeah. I don't write like that. I find it really difficult to write to a genre because I read so many broad genres. I love so many of them that I can't go, I could just write. I
don't know if that many writers
thrillers.
can. I think that's what you get squadged into, don't
Yeah,
you,
no,
by
it's true.
publishers.
Yeah.
It's true. I think
That's what's hard.
I found it quite
Yeah.
helpful myself. It was sort of at the 30%, 30
Thousand
Thousand
word.
word.
mark. I think at least I know I'm heading for a midpoint reversal.
Yes,
yes.
It's not too far away.
Yeah.
And I know that's exciting, so I just need to get there.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I
In
don't
terms
know,
of
I found it-
like
I found it
milestones. I didn't naively. I didn't read that many psychological thrillers before I wrote one. I was really inspired by Daphne du Maurier. My mum got me into Daphne du Maurier when I was
Me
a
too.
teenager, like a lot of teenage girls. I completely fell in love with Rebecca and the twist in Rebecca, and I mean, just the suspense. You know, she just writes such incredible suspense novels. My cousin Rachel. So for me, I think that's just always been in the back of my mind that if I ever wrote a book, I wanted to write those sorts of books, a mystery and a twist and all of those sorts of things. But in terms of things like Girl on the Train and things, I read more of those later in life. And once I published The Girl Before You, and once I had a publisher for The Girl Before You, and everyone said, you've written a psychological suspense novel, and I was like, oh, have I?
Oh, thank you so much.
Exactly, and then you get given the certain covers and the blurbs, and so I think that often writers, especially when they start out, are just writing a story that interests them, that then other people say, oh, this is, as you say, the publishers, you have to sell it.
It has to fit it into,
yes,
into
exactly,
the box, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
But
How
is
did-
is that helpful, or is it?
Is it helpful? I don't know. I mean, it is helpful to know what other people are doing because you are more aware of the tropes, and I suppose then you can play with them. But also, I think personally, I love thrillers, but I would never just want to write thrillers and try and write or try and do a formulaic novel. I think it's nice to read as widely as possible from as many genres as possible, and then hopefully write something that is distinctly yours. You know.
I mean, sometimes I'm assuming, because I never in my wildest dreams think I'd be able to write a thriller, but that having some choice in them. I mean, having it narrowed for you somewhat helps. It's like when somebody says, could you write about anything at all in the universe? Then you can't think of a thing, can
Yeah.
you? But if it's like, could you write about something that happened this afternoon?
Yes.
You can
Yeah.
find stuff.
Yeah.
And in that way, as you say, a corset might be how it might be helpful. I don't know.
And I think all writers write about something that is bothering them.
Yeah.
Or that they need to explore at a given moment.
Yeah.
And I think it can be quite helpful to have like a wall to kick a wall
Yes.
against rather
Yeah.
than a whole
No.
field next to a road. I think it's helpful
I think
to sort of pin it to something.
No, I think structure can definitely be a friend. And also, once you're aware of it, things like the midpoint
Yeah.
or the Dark Night of the Soul or whatever those kind of beats are that Save the Cat sort of teaches us about, but I mean, a lot of writers do instinctively anyway. But once you're aware of it, you can also play around with them and, you can have fun with it.
Yeah, and it's true, because Jane Eyre, if you think about it, is a Gothic novel, isn't it? It's got that sort of... But I couldn't make this particular book Gothic enough. I couldn't get any more horror into it because it just wouldn't work. So I thought, right, okay, I'll just do
No,
a
'cause you
romantic
don't want to
suspense.
over-
You
you
don't
don't
want
want
to
to overdo
over
it.
kind of think, this is my genre. And you're right, it can be restricted, but if you kind of think, well, I'm just going to write it, see what people say, and then get other people to give you a genre,
Yes.
which is much easier when they read
Actually,
it.
and Susanna.
Yes.
I think it might like this.
And when you came to go from thriller to your literary fiction, did your publisher give you? Did they kind of go, well, that would be a really lovely idea. Don't write us another one that'll sell more money like the last three have. Go and write something completely different. Were they enthusiastic about this plan of yours?
Well, they were certainly more enthusiastic about this than they had been
The thrillers.
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I actually think it's a better book, and that might count for something.
Were you happier writing in that style? Or just
Well, I thought I'd done thrillers. I mean, I'd done 3 of them, and I wanted to write something which was much closer to my heart, and that book is partly about being someone my age, and it's about the this problem with nostalgia that people tend to have as the
British
older they
affliction, I
get.
think.
Is it a British affliction? Well,
Heritage Britain and all that.
Yes. Maybe so. I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to find a novel, in both senses of the word, way of interrogating my own feelings about age and the relationship between somebody, an older person, and the way they were in the past, which does become, the problem with getting a bit old is that you do keep revisiting what was good in the past, because what lies ahead of you is perhaps not quite so exciting. So the past becomes increasingly important, and so to that extent, the novel was a sort of exercise in honesty.
That's a good. I think that's a good log line. Elevator pitch, an exercise in honesty.
You reckon?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Can you?
I think so. And do you write both sections in the present tense or the past tense, or I'm just thinking about how you... when you talk about the 2 different threads, are they...
Well, as it happens, the modern section is written in the present
Okay.
tense, as it is
Yeah.
happening
Yeah.
in front of your very eyes. But the 1963 narrative is effectively a diary,
Okay.
anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know how most people write diaries. Mine has always been in the past. I did this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've got questions. We've got yes. Lady back there.
You work on different projects, a completely separate one from the other, to all of you, to give you ideas, to give you impetus if you get bored with something. Do you have more than one project you're working on?
Well, there's always, in my case, there's always half a dozen lying around in my little office. But I would guess that most of them will never even get as far as 30,000 words.
How about you, Nicola? Have you got?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting for me this year because up until this year, so The Girl Before You just wrote one book at a time, You and Me, one book at a time. I have not had a good lockdown, and I'm not going to say how many books I've started, but I'm now working on 3 at the same time, and I'm pretty sure that's because of lockdown. I find it really difficult to write. I really missed the world. I really missed engaging with the world. I missed talking with my friends. I missed eavesdropping. I missed travelling. I missed all of those things. I always thought that having endless time to write would be wonderful, and it hasn't.
Not necessarily,
has not
is it?
been.
No.
And so I think part of what has helped me cope with that is starting 3 things. I've got a thriller that I'm writing for my agent. I'm working on a non-fiction piece, and I've started working on a slightly more maybe literary open sort of thing as well. And actually, it's been nice, like a holiday. Like you were saying, going to south of France, for me to jump between projects, which is not something I ever thought I would do. So it's been a different sort of year from the past.
But also, it kind of gives you a journalistic background, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
when you're juggling several things
No,
and focusing on that.
exactly.
Yeah,
No,
different
it
styles
has been
and things.
it has been quite enjoyable. And if you don't feel like, I think also writing a thriller, the material's very dark. You don't feel like working with that material during a pandemic all the time. So it has been nice to jump onto other things, and if I don't feel like that, I can go onto
Be
it.
very silly somewhere else.
No,
Yes.
exactly.
I do similar things. I've got 2 books that are sort of bubbling away, but I also do, like, I write a little short story if I can't be asked to write the book. It never sees the light of day, but I just think, I just had a little idea, I'll just write that. And it's usually about 1,000 word, 5,000 word, depending on how the short story goes. And some of the times, because I also do little bits of writing anyway, not journalistic, but just columns and things like that, that keeps me occupied when I'm not writing my books, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, this is a question for Robin. I'm interested in the transition from popular fiction to literary fiction. I assume that your thrillers were more popular fiction than literary fiction. And how did you go about it? And what did you gain and what did you lose in the process?
Well, I lost some things I was quite glad to lose, like elaborate plotting, for example. But what I mostly gained was what I was hinting at earlier. I mean, a political thriller is an exercise in being clever in a way. At least that's what you hope it will appear to be. This book, as I say, is an exercise in trying to understand things, trying to interrogate your own feelings and the extent to which they've been true. They've been honest and not, fooling yourself, as you increasingly do, perhaps, as the years pass by, that everything was okay. Well, it wasn't. And it's that little interface which I found I really wanted and enjoyed examining.
Question here.
Quick question for Nicola, actually. I'm just interested to know how long it took from inception to actually the final draft.
For my first novel,
You said it was a long time.
it was a very long time. I started it at the end of 2010, and it came out in 2019, so that's nearly a decade.
You have so just cheered me up.
But I think that's actually from talking to my writer friends. I think a 10-year apprenticeship is quite normal, and I think you're learning from rewriting. It's not. It may feel like a time's wasted time, but actually it's not. The rewriting is teaching you something.
Yeah. I should be taking that back to the writers' group on Monday, and it'll make them feel a lot better. I think possibly we've come to the conclusion of this session this evening. I'd really like to thank these three wonderful novelists for sharing their experiences and bringing their books for us to read. They will be very happy to sell you copies over there afterwards, I'm sure, sign things, whatever. Thank you so much, Nicola, Robin and Saz. It's been delightful talking to you. Quite happily do it for hours.
Absolutely,
But thank you
absolutely.
very, very much indeed. And thank you all for being here and being part of this event tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.